Part 1. The first glimpse. It was a typical Tuesday night, the kind of evening where nothing extraordinary happens, where everything feels predictable. I had just settled into my couch after a long day of work, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, when something caught my eye. A shadow. Not a typical shadow, mind you, but one that seemed to flicker just outside my window. It wasn't much, just a fleeting moment, but it was enough to make my heart race. I dismissed it at first. It was probably the branches swaying in the wind, I thought. Still, there was something unnerving about the way it had moved. I stood up and walked over to the window, trying to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The streetlights outside flickered weakly in the cold night, casting long, distorted shadows on the sidewalk. But there was nothing, no figure, just the usual quiet neighborhood. I felt a strange hesitation in my chest, something nagging at me, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was just my imagination, I reasoned, as I sat back down. But for the rest of the evening, I couldn't shake the thought of that shadow. It was as if I had seen something or someone just outside of my vision, something that I wasn't meant to notice. Later that night, as I turned off the lights and crawled into bed, I heard a soft tapping against the window. It was faint, but there. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. The kind of tapping you'd hear if someone was standing outside, gently knocking to get your attention. I was paralyzed, staring at the dark ceiling. Was it the wind? A bird, perhaps? I told myself it was nothing, that I was being ridiculous. But deep down, something told me this wasn't just a coincidence. Part 2. The return of the shadow. The next few days passed with little fanfare, and I almost convinced myself that the incident had been nothing more than a figment of my imagination. But something about that evening stuck with me. Every time I walked by the window, a quiet anxiety would creep up on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, and not by a curious neighbor. It started again on a Thursday night. I was sitting at my kitchen table, reading a book, when I felt that familiar sensation, like someone was standing just outside my window, watching me. My skin prickled. I turned my head and glanced toward the window. There, in the shadows, was the shape again. This time, it was clearer. Tall, dark, and almost too still. It didn't move, didn't sway with the wind like a tree would. It was simply there, lingering outside as though waiting for something or someone. My heart began to pound. I stood up and walked toward the window slowly, each step heavy, reluctant. When I peered outside, the figure was gone, but the air felt thicker, colder somehow. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I told myself to breathe, to relax, but my legs felt weak. The unease lingered. That night, as I tried to fall asleep, the tapping returned, louder this time. I shot upright in bed, my breath catching in my throat. It came from the window, unmistakably, a soft, almost rhythmic tapping that didn't stop. I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, my knees trembling, and made my way to the window. When I pulled back the curtains, there was no figure this time. But there was something else, footprints in the snow below, distinct prints that hadn't been there earlier in the day. The realization hit me hard. Someone had been standing outside my window. Someone who had been watching me for who knows how long. Part 3. The discovery. The following morning, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to know what was going on, what had been happening outside my window. I took a step back, trying to make sense of it all. Maybe it was some kind of prank, maybe just a coincidence, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The unease I'd been feeling had intensified to the point of discomfort. I walked to the front of the house and examined the snow, looking for any clues. The footprints were still there, faint but discernible. But they weren't just any footprints. They were large, uneven, as though whoever had made them had been dragging something. A heavy, unnatural presence clung to the air, and I couldn't escape the thought that someone had been watching me. My breath hitched when I noticed something else, a strange indentation in the snow, almost like a person had stood perfectly still in one place for hours, waiting for something. I swallowed hard. What could this be? A shadow, tapping on the window, strange footprints leading nowhere. These weren't coincidences. They were signs. But of what? I had to know more. I decided to speak to the neighbours to see if they had noticed anything unusual. The first few people I talked to had no idea what I was talking about. But when I spoke to an older woman who had lived in the neighbourhood for decades, her eyes grew wide with recognition. "The house you're in," she whispered, her voice shaky, "used to belong to a man named Mr. Garrett. He was a recluse. They say he disappeared a long time ago. No one knows exactly what happened to him, but after he left, strange things started happening around here. People said they saw shadows, figures in the windows." She paused, looking over her shoulder, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You're not the first to notice it." My blood ran cold. There it was, the truth. The figure wasn't random. It was linked to the house's dark history, to the shadow of Mr. Garrett, who had vanished without a trace. Was it him, or something else that had stayed behind? Either way, it didn't matter. The figure had been there, watching, waiting for something, or someone. I left the conversation feeling a strange mix of fear and disbelief. It wasn't just a shadow, it was a lingering presence tied to the past, to a man whose story was lost in the shadows of time. I never felt truly safe in that house again. Part 1. A fresh start. A growing fear. My partner and I had just moved into a beautiful apartment on the 12th floor of a high-rise. The view was spectacular, overlooking the city lights, the bustling streets below. We were excited, nervous, and ready to start fresh. But the first night we spent there, things felt off. At first, it was nothing more than a nagging sensation, a flicker in the corner of my eye that made me question whether something was wrong. I thought it was just the adjustment to a new place, the excitement mingled with the unease of settling in. But then, it happened. We had just unpacked, and as we were sitting on the couch, I glanced out the large window that took up one wall of the living room. Across the street, I noticed something. A figure. A silhouette standing perfectly still in the window of the building opposite us. It was a man, or at least it looked like a man. He stood there, motionless, just staring into our apartment. It sent a chill down my spine, but I figured it was just someone in their own apartment, unaware of the angle of our view. Still, the feeling lingered. I turned away from the window, trying to shake the thought from my mind. I told my partner about it, and we laughed it off, blaming it on the strange angles of the city's architecture. But the figure didn't go away. It was there again the next evening, and the evening after that. Part 2. The growing tension. The more we saw the figure, the more unsettling it became. He was always in the same position, standing in front of the window, never moving, just staring. We'd never seen anyone else in that apartment, no one entering or leaving. And yet, the figure appeared each night, always staring directly at us. We started closing the curtains when night fell. It was the only way to feel like we had any privacy. But every night, I would catch myself glancing over to the building across the street, half expecting to see him there again. One night, after a long day, we sat down to relax, the curtains tightly drawn. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It felt like we were being watched, and it wasn't just the figure across the street anymore. It felt closer. The next day, I noticed something odd. The door to our apartment, which we always locked, was slightly ajar. I was sure I had locked it when we left. My stomach churned as I walked inside, half expecting to find the figure from across the street standing in our living room. But there was nothing. No sign of forced entry, just the lingering sense of being followed, of something dark and oppressive in the air. That night, I was unable to sleep. I kept hearing small noises, like whispers coming from the direction of the window. It was quiet enough that I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like someone was trying to get our attention, calling from outside. And then a knock at the window, 3 soft taps, rhythmic and deliberate. I looked outside, and there he was. The figure was standing closer to the glass, his face now visible in the dim light. The man had no expression, no emotion, just his eyes, staring, cold and unblinking. Part 3, the shocking revelation. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I decided to confront the man across the street to figure out what was happening. I went to the building the next morning, hoping to meet the tenant and ask about the strange figure. But when I got to the apartment, the door was locked. There was no one around. I asked the building manager about the apartment, but his face fell when I mentioned it. That apartment's been vacant for years, he said, his voice strangely quiet. No one's lived there for a long time. We've been trying to rent it out, but it's not easy. People keep reporting strange things, like figures in the window, but no one's ever there when we check. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The figure wasn't real. Or rather, the man wasn't. He was a ghost, or some lingering presence from the past, still trapped in that apartment. We moved out a week later. The figure, the knocking, the unease, it was all too much. I never looked back. Part 1. The Rural Retreat. I was looking for peace when I moved into the farmhouse, nestled on the edge of a small rural town. The house had been on the market for a while, which should have been a red flag, but I ignored it. The rolling fields, the isolation, the fresh start, it all seemed perfect. The house was old, with creaky floors and faded wallpaper, but it had character. I spent the first few days unpacking and settling in, basking in the quiet. It was the kind of place where you could hear nothing but the wind and the occasional rustling of leaves. I could get used to this. One afternoon, as I was arranging some books in the living room, I happened to glance outside through the large window. There, standing in the distance near the edge of the property, was a woman. She was perfectly still, her figure clearly outlined against the fading sunlight. She wore a long, tattered dress, and her hair hung loosely around her face, covering part of it. I squinted, trying to make out who it was. I didn't recognize her, but then again, I didn't know many people in the area yet. I figured it was just someone from the town walking by, perhaps someone who lived nearby. But when I turned back to the window a few minutes later, she was still there. For a moment, I considered going outside to greet her, but something stopped me. I felt uneasy, a sense of wrongness hanging in the air. When I looked again, the woman was gone. I shook it off, thinking it was just my mind playing tricks, but the unease lingered. I went to bed that night, the image of her still fresh in my mind. Part 2. The Unseen Presence. Days passed, but the strange feeling in the house didn't fade. It was subtle, like a lingering weight, a quiet presence that you couldn't shake. Every now and then I'd find myself glancing out the window, half expecting to see her standing there again. And, sure enough, a few nights later, she appeared again. This time I had no doubt. It was the same woman, standing in the same spot near the edge of the field. But something was different. Her posture was unnaturally still, as if she hadn't moved a muscle for hours. The eerie thing was that it was dark now, the sun having long set, and yet she was still visible as if the night couldn't quite hide her. I watched her for a while, frozen in place, a cold chill creeping down my spine. There was something unnerving about the way she stood. It was as if she was waiting for something or someone. I felt the urge to go outside, to confront her, to understand why she was there, but I couldn't move. Something in the air felt too thick, too oppressive. Eventually, I turned away from the window, deciding it was just my overactive imagination. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening for any sounds, any sign of movement outside. Then I heard it. A faint knock, almost imperceptible, like someone tapping lightly on the window. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a tree branch tapping against the glass. This was deliberate. Someone or something was outside. I dared not look outside. My heart pounded in my chest, my body frozen under the covers. The knocking came again, this time louder, more urgent. And then the most chilling thing of all, the unmistakable sound of a voice, soft, barely a whisper, but distinct, calling my name. Part 3. The Hidden Truth. The morning after the knocking, I ventured outside to check the window, to see if there was any sign of someone being there. There was nothing. No footprints in the grass, no traces of anyone standing near the window. I chalked it up to a nightmare, the product of too much stress and too little sleep. But that night, the woman returned. This time, she wasn't standing near the edge of the field. She was much closer. Closer than I had ever seen her before. I spotted her from the corner of my eye, standing in the window of the house directly across the field from mine. She was watching me. Her face was pale, and her eyes seemed to glow in the moonlight, locked onto mine. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I rushed to the window, pressing my face against the glass to get a better look. She was standing there, motionless, just as before. But this time she wasn't just staring at me, she was beckoning me. Her arm raised slowly, a long skeletal hand reaching out in a gesture I couldn't fully understand. It was an invitation, or a warning. I couldn't tear my eyes away. I couldn't stop myself from walking toward the window, drawn to her presence. But just as I reached the glass, she vanished. Gone. Just like that. Panicked, I rushed out the door, determined to find out where she had gone. I crossed the field, every step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the house across the field, I was almost breathless. The door was locked. The house looked abandoned. No lights, no movement. It was empty. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I had to know more. I went back into the house, grabbed my phone, and started researching the history of the property. That's when I stumbled upon a local news article from decades ago. It was about a woman named Abigail, who had lived in a farmhouse just like mine, across the field. Abigail had disappeared without a trace, and her family had never been able to find out what had happened to her. But what struck me the most was the date. It had been the same year that I had moved into the house. I didn't understand it. Why was she appearing to me? Why was she still lingering after all these years? Then I remembered something else. The woman had never spoken. She had only called my name. After everything I've seen, after everything I've experienced, I can't help but wonder, what draws the past to the present? Why do certain figures, certain presences, linger where they shouldn't? The woman in the window wasn't just an illusion or a trick of the mind. She was a reminder, a ghost tied to the land, still waiting for someone to notice her. If you've ever felt like you were being watched, or seen something you couldn't explain in a window, maybe, like me, you'll find yourself questioning what's real and what's not. The truth is, some things are better left unexplained, left untouched. But maybe that's the problem, isn't it? Once you've noticed something, once you've seen it with your own eyes, you can never truly look away. It stays with you, in the back of your mind, lingering in the shadows. So the next time you look out a window, ask yourself, what's really out there? Thank you for joining me in this unsettling journey. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you experienced something like this? What do you think it all means? And if you want more chilling stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the next mystery might just be closer than you think. End of script. Sleep well.